Welcome to Premier Introductions Incorporated. We go by the handle PII, and this is the second. What you're looking at are some hydrangeas from the second iteration of our company. The first iteration was Plant Introduction Incorporated, again PII, and we sold that to Bailey Nursery in Minnesota in 2015. We had a 5-year non-compete. We started back up January 1 of 2020. We actually sowed our first seed. And what you're looking at now, this is July of 2023, late July. And some of these are known hydrangeas that we bred. In fact, everything in here is we bred it. But we also got new material that originated from the start of our company on January 1 of 2020. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the hydrangea world. These are hydrangea macrophyllas that you're viewing. This is one called Bloomstruck, which was an open pollinated seedling from Twist and Shout, which was actually a controlled cross, and we'll talk about that a little later on. But Bloomstruck is an amazing rebloomer. Some of you have heard the word remontant or rebloom. Hydrangeas typically are subject to cold temperatures, early fall freezes, midwinter temperature lows, or late spring or late winter, late spring freezes, and they knock them to the ground. In fact, everything that you're looking at, or Katie will pan throughout, was completely knocked to the ground. We cleaned it up back in January. We finally covered these about January 11th. We were late with the covering because we had a frost and freezes back in November. And then we had the 2 degrees out here. We're colder. We're out in our county, Coney County, at 2 degrees. That didn't help anything. And we finally were smart enough to get them covered. They were fertilized. These are in-ground trials. When we finally get to a point where we have a hydrangea that we think is worthy of possible introduction, we grow it in containers to see if it can be produced, propagated, and also produced under nursery conditions. Then we put at least one plant of the top selection in the ground to take a look at in-ground performance without anything different than what the home gardener would do. Obviously, we got them growing under shade. They're under 50% saran. Katie again will show you the saran cloth. And no matter what the books say about hydrangeas needing maybe no more than 2 hours of full sun or whatever, macrophyllas particularly, I think even shade, kind of like we have here, is the ideal. This is shaded all day long, full sun, cloudy days, rainy days, whatever. And as you are panned or as you view through the continuum of hydrangea of our selection, you can see they're looking great. And you got to remember, these were killed literally to the ground. Most of the flowers that you're looking at are being born on new growth of the season. And Katie can take a close-up here, and you'll see buds just emerging. That's on new growth. You'll see flowers that are almost spent, I would say, pretty much past their prime, slowly drying. And you'll see flowers that pretty much are in full glory, maybe just a little bit past. And this is what happens with what we call remontant hydrangeas. They typically can flower on old wood, but they also flower on new wood, new growth of the season. And that's pretty much the way the market has gone. If it is a remontant, from what we've learned, and my two partners I have learned, that most brands or most nurseries are not interested. And the first question they ask is it remontant? They'll look at it, they may like it, but then they ask the question, hey, is it remontant? If not, they walk away. And we've learned that if you're not breeding for remontancy or reblooming, then you're wasting your money, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your resources, because it's never going to go anywhere in today's commercial market. This all started with the introduction of Endless Summer, which happened in 2004. To Bailey Nursery's credit, they spent several amount of money marketing the original Endless Summer. It is still top-selling hydrangea macrophylla, with probably 25 million plus sold since the introduction in 2004. And subsequent to that, they've introduced Blushing Bride, Blushing Bride, Twist and Shout, Summer Crush, Bloomstruck, and the latest is one called Pop Star. And I might mention all those were bred at our company, which was Plant Introductions Incorporated. And when they purchased our company, they indeed bought all the genetics that went with it. And they've done a superb job marketing. That blue pot is in every garden center. And pretty much if you want a hydrangea macrophylla, that's the starting point, and then you can go from there. So Kate and I are going to kind of walk you through and show you a couple of our introductions. Bloomstruck obviously Bailey owns it, but we bred it. It came out of Twist and Shout, and it is still probably the best, in my opinion, the best rebloomer. We've used it in subsequent breeding. In fact, the next plant that you're looking at is one called Summer Crush, which is a rebloomer, but not as potent as Bloomstruck. It is a cross between Hot Red and Bloomstruck. It's more compact, has stronger stems, might have a little better sheeny foliage, darker green foliage, but as you can pretty much see, it does not produce the cornucopia of flowers that Bloomstruck does. As we move further down, this is one of our original hybrids from University of Georgia. We crossed Lady in Red with Pennymac, which is a rebloomer, and we ended up with what was named Twist and Shout, which is still in the market. It is one of the most beautiful lace caps, and Twist and Shout has proved to be an outstanding parent for introgressing or introducing reblooming into Hydrangea macrophylla. And many people, I see this, my wife and I traveled New England a lot, and particularly in the fall, this is still flowering, full of flowers in coastal Maine, up in Bar Harbor, Booth Bay Harbor area. So it's an amazing plant. It's hardy, it's a guaranteed rebloomer, and we have actually made selections of this. We found mop head forms of this, which we patented as rock and roll. So Twist and Shout was transformed into a mop head, and that's just down the road here, which is called rock and roll. This is rock and roll, which is a mop head sport of Twist and Shout, and the flowers are so heavy and so large that they actually weigh down the plant. And the one problem with both Twist and Shout and rock and roll is that they're big. They're big and they'll be sprawly. The growers often use growth regulators to kind of calm them down and to dampen down their size a little bit. But again, guaranteed rebloom. And if you look at, you can't imagine how these things looked coming out of winter. They were sticks with a few leaves on them. And we finally took off the cover. We did cover these with a cloth called Reemay, R-E-E-M-A-Y, which is a spun bonded kind of fabric. We used 2 layers, which gave us 6 degrees, maybe to 10 degrees protection, and we were able to at least save the plants, and that was not always the case this year. So what you see is pretty much, again, all new growth. In our breeding, when we started our new company, so these were all done by University of Georgia or, excuse me, by plant introduction. Since we started the company, it took a little different turn, and we've used some other parentage in our breeding. And this is one called Summer Crush 0520. It was selected in 2020, and it has been patented and given the name Showstopper. And this is available in the market. And what's remarkable about this, number one, is compact. This is the original plant, which you're now looking at, which is essentially 3.5 years, 4 years old. It has red stems, ruby red stems. It has beautiful leaves with purple veining. And just another kind of feature, the foliage is different than typical macrophylla in that it's kind of V-shaped, or kind of has a trough-like effect to it, so it really bounces the light off. And this makes for a prettier plant overall. And obviously it's been flowering this one has been flowering since June. Again, there's spent flowers further down, which are kind of a mauvey rose color. There's new flowers, which are fully developed, which again are, I don't know what the color you want to call it, but it's a rose, mauvey pink, whatever. And if you look at the overall plant, you see flower buds still emerging at most of the most of the new shoots develop. So this is, we think this is maybe top of the line, top shelf plant. This is different. And there's too many hydrangea macrophyllas that aren't different. And this one, I think, has a chance to really jump in the marketplace with some marketing. Stokely Nursery in Mobile, Alabama area is growing it, and they've had it on the shelves at Home Depot in the southeast. And I think as it gets broader exposure and a little bit more publicity, I think it could be a terrific addition to the so-called remontant hydrangeas, many of which that don't give you 100% performance based on what the hyperbole that's assigned to them. What you're looking at now is kind of a traditional, I call Nico blue, the original endless summer blue type of flower. And I found this in a local little town in Georgia, and was able to ask for cuttings, receive cuttings, and we grew it for several years. and we ended up naming it Azure Skies. And it too is a rebloomer, much like endless summer. And again, you can see the flowers that are still, I'd say, pronounced blue and quite beautiful. And there's flower buds coming, and there's one of the original flowers which originated from last year's wood. So everything that you're seeing in the video is again produced on new growth of the season. So this one has not attracted as much attention as the rock and roll, which is also a brand sport that I found, or we found, my wife and I found, and but it's closer to, if you want the so-called Cape Cod blue flower, then Azure Skies is probably the best choice. Katie and I will take you a little later on. We'll take you to some hybrids that we produced. We've crossed, we've crossed Azure Skies and rock and roll. We've done it both ways, with Azure Skies, the maternal parent, and with rock and roll, the maternal parent. And we'll show you several selections that we think are actually better and even heavier flowering with better foliage and a more compact habit than the original rock and roll. Katie just shows you an overview of where we keep our stock plants. Once we make selections and we need to build up numbers, we need to keep testing, we need to license nurserymen and various brands so they can test it and find out whether it's true to type. And you can kind of see blocks, little isolated blocks, which were little liners when we potted them up in the spring. We've taken cuttings of all these. So what you're looking at is literally a second or third production of flowers. And I mentioned when Kate and I were showing you the original plants that we selected, talked about Azure Skies and rock and roll. Well, this is Azure Skies, rock and roll times Azure Skies. It's called 2122, and it's a joy to look at these. Look at the flowers on this thing. These are just little liners that's stuck in a pot. And I'm not sure, there's no date on this pot, but this is what we want. We want small plants that flower heavily, that will continue to flower. And as Katie pans over this mini block, we've only got about, I think probably about 15 plants in this block. Notice the number of green sepal inflorescences just developing, and every terminal, almost every terminal, has a flower bud coming. So as long as you water and fertilize, and that's something I should mention, we're under overhead water. We're consistent. We water every day, typically in the morning. We may have a cool down in the afternoon, about 2 or 3, to keep the foliage from flagging and just to keep the plants in a better state, if you will. And fertilizer we use is a Harold's 8 to 9 month. We use also a 3 to 4 month, and it's a 15% nitrogen, and then I don't know, 6 or 8% phosphorus, and maybe 11%, 10% of potassium. It also has minors, and that's all we do. That's all we fertilize. The reason these are all pink is because they're in bark. And as you're growing in a bark medium, this would be pine bark, there's no aluminum. So if you want, or if it's necessary to turn the plants blue, you need to add aluminum sulfate in some form or another. There's slow release aluminum sulfate, and there's also aluminum sulfate salts or crystals that you can buy. Traditionally, we add about 42 grams of surface applied aluminum sulfate over the surface of the media, water it in, and it takes a while to bloom. It isn't instantaneous. In fact, they may not even blue completely. You may have to do it twice, treat them twice. But you need to be careful with aluminum sulfate. You can, number one, burn the plants, and you can definitely dwarf the plants. We've made every mistake that you can make in the business in the process of getting to where I'm talking to you in a realistic sense about how to do this, or the best way to do this. And this is another one of our selections, and this was from an open pollinated seedling of twist and shout. And I mentioned twist and shout to you before, which is a lace cap. Well, this comes out pretty white, and we'll pan over that to show you. It goes to a beautiful soft, I'd say almost shell pink. And then finally, if there's aluminum, it turns a blue pretty much close to a Cape Cod blue. It's a little lighter than the one you just saw previously, the rock and roll times Azure Skies 2122, which had the deeper pink flowers. But the blue, when you have the aluminum, actually is pretty similar. You might know too, the foliage is clean, sheeny, dark green, big bold leaves, and again, it tends to be flowering too almost on every every turn. Well, not as potent as the one, the Azure Skies, the Rock and Roll Times Azure Sky, but definitely a color break, a good rebloomer, and we don't really have what I would say would be a good white rebloomer. It starts white and then goes to a pink and then to a blue with the presence of aluminum. This is this is again a macrophylla. It's deep purple times bloomstruck, and it's 0121. It means the first plant selected in 21. And when we first selected this, it was compact, loaded with big flowers. We had blued it, and we'll have a still picture in the presentation to show you what the original plant looked like. Well, I potted these up in early April of this year and never did anything, never even pruned them. And it looks like we've got another great rebloomer. And again, compact habit, and what we're continually looking for are stems. When I go like this, the stems reflex and don't fall over, don't stay splayed down. So very, very important to have a nice compact plant with good presentation. The flowers big enough that they can be seen and enjoyed, and also they don't, again, weigh down the stems, particularly after you get something like a rain or whatever. But I'm very excited about this. I just saw this on last Thursday. We're on a Saturday when Katie and I are filming, and I go, gee, well, do we let this one go? So I went back and checked my old images, and there it was, the original plant from 21. And somehow this is a good example of one that got away. We never gave it a lot of credence, and we keep looking at it sort of by happenstance, and all of a sudden it surfaces as a great possibility. It's nowhere in the market yet, but it gives you an idea. We have so many seedlings. We had 2,000 last year. We had 3,745 macrophyllas the previous year. We had about 3,000 before that, and the first year it was in the 3,000s too. So combined, you're looking at 10,000 seedlings over literally 4 growing seasons, and you never get it all right. You just there's too many to look at, too many that are similar, and you simply can't keep them all. So it's kind of a roll of the dice based on subjective knowledge, that accumulated wisdom might be a better way to put it, and you make the best choices at the time, and you pray and hope you're correct. And if you don't, a few of them that you kind of keep over and linger a bit, they tend to show up later on. It's maybe like the child that didn't develop at a certain age and all of a sudden becomes a nuclear physicist. And it's kind of the same thing with hydrangeas, although I don't know any hydrangeas that are nuclear physicists.